You are but millions, our outnumbered nations are as the sands upon the sounding shore. We are the Scythians, we are the slit-eyed Asians. Try to wage war with us, you'll try no more.
Right, and we're live. Hello everybody, welcome to Radio Pannonia. I am Sam Y.J. Murkitson, aka Janos Jalic, also known as the host of the Mongols podcast, and this is my co-host Hanako.
What's up? I'm back.
And here we are with episode 1. Hello, Scythia! So the thing about Radio Pannonia is that we're basically going to try to cover basically all the history that's available in the Carpathian Basin. That's going to be a lot, in case you're wondering.
Sounds comprehensive. No.
Alright, so our little story basically starts with the Scythians right around 700 BC. These guys are rather famous for being in Herodotus and being the semi-inspiration behind the word barbarian.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, basically, the Greeks had no idea what the heck they were saying, and basically it was like, you know what, we'll just say, so considering that you're stuttering when you're speaking our language, we'll just say, you're barbaros, which is stuttering, so barbarian.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Like, a lot of the times with old words, like, you look back into, like, the meaning, and you're finding, like, oh, so they named these people basically just to roast them. Love that. Like,
Also kind of feels a little bit racist, though.
But then what else were things like back then other than racist? We're still trying to figure it out today, which is a problem, but, you know.
Anyways, moving on. So, as far as we know, the Scythians are the earliest people in the Carpathian Basin that are, well, horse archers. Now, as you'll probably notice throughout this podcasting series on the history of the Carpathian Basin, we've got a lot of horse archers running through here. We've got the Huns, the Magyars, Avars, the Mongols show up for a hot second. The Turks also keep on waltzing in. So, there's a lot of mounted archery here, in case you're wondering.
Gotcha.
So, as far as we know, the Scythians are the first ones to show up, and they officially show up in the Carpathian Basin around 550, and they're mostly actually just simply being pushed west, like most mounted archer groups when they actually decide to show up west. They don't just come here on a pillage mission. There's usually a problem they have back home.
Right. More resources, or we hate our leader, or, you know, just standard old people, old civilization problems.
Indeed. And we don't know exactly for sure what the Scythians looked like because, well, obviously no cameras. But we've probably checked enough of their culture and whatever, like, scraps of bone we have left from their tombs. And we've likely determined that they come from, I think, the Indo-European linguistic group. They're fairly closely related to the Iranians.
Okay.
Or Persians, whatever we want to call them, but probably Iranians because that's more accurate.
Yeah. Okay.
And since they're also a nomadic horse archer, people that's rather short on an alphabet, we will not be hearing from them. We'll be specifically hearing from people who wrote about them, which means that they were probably not the most accurate knives in the drawer.
Yeah.
And when I mean by most accurate, not most accurate knives in the drawer, I mean Herodotus.
Oh.
Yeah, he's a guy. He's actually traveling around much of the ancient Greek Know world during the 5th century, basically right after the Persians get their butts kicked out of Greece.
Okay.
And he's mostly writing his book to figure out why did the Persians invade and how the Greeks end up winning. And, well, he bases like half his book on hearsay, so I'm just like, oh, yay.
Yay, accurate historical accounts. I claim hearsay. Of course. So easy to claim.
Well, at least I'm not dealing with it on a historical agenda. Wilson! Sorry, I have a lot of problems with Wilson. Thank you, Cypher.
That's funny.
But anyways, back to actual history. So most likely we're seeing the Scythians likely originating right around the first time they pop up in history as a distinct group, probably around Syria and Mesopotamia. And just as soon as they pop up, they kind of have some neighbor problems. So first they're being pushed a bit west by a group known as the Macedonia. And the Macedonia have a bunch of clashes with all sorts of people, most famously Cyrus. And apparently they managed to keep Cyrus the Great out. But that's obviously 200 years later down the line, so let's get back to the Scythians. And another people that the Scythians actually clashed with are the Cimmerians. The Cimmerians are basically right where the Scythians are right now, and then they were just simply pushed out because there were too many Scythians in the room, and tried attacking other places. And then the Scythians noticed that Assyria's right next door, and they're full of riches because they're an empire, hello. So at least give it a shot. And the Assyrians and the Scythians clashed a few times. Sometimes they win, and sometimes the Scythians win, sometimes the Assyrians win, and eventually the two agree on, we're bashing each other a bit hard. How about we agree to an alliance? And the king of Assyria, Esarhaddon, he's like, that's a great idea. In fact, I have this daughter who I have totally spoken with on this matter. She is totally willing to marry your king. In case you're wondering, we didn't speak with the daughter.
Of course not. But, that's kind of how it works, right? Get your children to seal your alliance deals and then just tell them afterwards. Like, oh yeah, I married you off to Germany. You're welcome. Bye.
She told me to treat her like a princess, so I married her off to some stranger to strengthen the alliance with France.
I've seen that joke.
It's perfect here. And so, needless to say, the Scythians are bribed by marriage and lots of gold, and they decide to go somewhere else. And what I mean by somewhere else, Egypt. And Egypt, this is 600, 700 BC. They're a little past their prime, so don't expect them to be fighting out the Scythians. So they've got, so they run to their, so they start losing to the Scythians, and they're thinking, well, okay, so we gotta cut a deal. So the Pharaoh, Psammetichus I, he sends over a bunch of gold, and he basically says, please do not pillage me. And the Scythians are like, well, this is big enough. Fine. So the Scythians finally settle down, and they get to know one of their neighbors, the Medes, actually quite well, and they get into an alliance.
Hold on, I gotta check on something really quick. I'll be back.
Okay.
Fridge was making weird noises. It's been doing this for 3 days now.
Let's see. So the Egyptians pay out the Scythians, and the Scythians do not pillage, and they get very friendly with the Medians, all while everything in Assyria goes straight downhill. And what I mean by straight downhill, the last great king, Ashurbanipal, had a magnificent idea when he died. I have these kids. I'm gonna let them run my empire. 5 seconds later. Never again. Ever.
You're not like he didn't make his decision. He did, you know. You only die once.
Well, at least you didn't leave it to your generals, said Alexander in the corner.
You could have been me.
But anyways, Assyria's in a giant civil war. Then they come out the other end, and they're like, we've lost a lot of money, mostly slapping each other in the face.
Yes.
And we've lost a lot of men. We don't have much strength left now, do we? And the Medes and the Scythians are like next door, and they're like, correct. In fact, we'll show you how much strength you have. We're outside your capital city, Nineveh. So what you gonna do? Well, we've got problems with the Babylonians. We're out of money. We're out of armies. So we're dead.
Wow.
So needless to say, the Assyrians are out of the picture.
Looted and pillaged out of the picture, just all of it.
Oh yeah, Nineveh is just absolutely sacked, which happens to also include Ashurbanipal's awesome library. Fudge!
Man, I hate when libraries get destroyed as the aftermath of violent men not just wanting to smite their enemies. It's like, oh, library? What's that? Set it on fire. Like, why not?
Okay, Caesar at least had the excuse of I'm distracted by Cleopatra.
That seems to be a pretty good excuse.
I mean, like, if I were 45, I would also be distracted by a hot Egyptian queen half my age.
Yeah, Cleopatra was something, that's for sure. It sounds a little gay for me to say, but that's okay. We embrace the gay.
And anyway, so the Medes have officially captured Nineveh with the help of the Scythians. But of course, they know that the Scythians' old pillaging instincts are going to kick in, and they're going to start just ravaging everything. And the Medes are like, maybe we want to get rid of that problem before it becomes an official problem. So they invite their Scythian buddies over for a night of happy drinking to celebrate their wondrous victory over Assyria. And in case you're wondering by wondrous victory, a night of drunken party, mostly the Medes don't drink too much, the Scythians drink hard, and the Scythians don't fall asleep, and then there's some stabbing in the Scythians' direction, and they're suddenly all dead and driven to the Black Sea.
Oh.
At least that's the story that Herodotus tells. I don't fully know the exact deal with that. So either way,
I hope that's the actual account because we love a good corpse hauling tale. I don't know.
I mean, like it's not like step warriors aren't the hardest drinkers in the room. Looking at you, Chinggis and Ayers. Also, did you see the party they had over in Indonesia? It was hilarious.
No, I don't think so.
Well, either way, the Indonesians saw it and took it as an opportunity to stab all the Mongols.
Now that's something I didn't know. Wow.
So,
taste medicine.
anyways, the Cyaxares and the Medes, they chase out the Scythians and all the way to the Black Sea, and now with all that in mind, Herodotus actually decides to do a little bit of here's what the Scythians and the Greeks say on the Scythians' strange backstory. So the first one apparently comes from Scythia, and basically, if you know Greek mythology, we all know where this is going. And when we mean by that, Zeus saw a woman.
No!
He got horny, and so this was the.
And then a demigod was born.
So he saw Brisine, the daughter of the river god Brisinnes. They had some fun, and a kid popped out by the name of Targeteus. And Targeteus, he has an okay life. He builds up a kingdom of his people, and he has 3 kids, Lipoxeus, Arpoxeus, and Calaxeus. And apparently, in his infinite wisdom, he decided that leaving his empire to his kids was a good idea. And the story goes, right as he kicked the bucket, 3 golden treasures fell from the sky. A plow, a cup, and a battle axe. Don't know how you got all of those made out of gold, but okay. Indeed. So, anyways, the first 2 sons, they tried to actually pick up all 3. And for whatever reason, because they're magic and fell from the skies, they actually burst into flames at the touch of the first 2. So, the first 2 with burnt hands are just like, Ag! Somebody else try this, we're done here. And Calaxeus picks it up, and everybody's like, this isn't going to work out too well, right? And then 5 seconds later, so he's not burnt. And this is a sign from the gods. Okay, so he's king now. And basically, after that, the history goes on from there as normal.
Yeah, not too different from the ways other kings have been crowned. Like, oh my god, he's been blessed by the gods. Let's worship him. Like, let him rule us. Yeah.
That's about right.
Yep.
And Herodotus apparently doesn't believe this story. Doesn't surprise me.
He's probably sick and tired of, like, the narrative, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so he decides to go into story 2, coming from his buddies over in Greece. And this is a story apparently from Heracles' 10th labor, where he's actually driving the cattle of the famous Gurion after, well, he killed Gurion in a fight. And because that was one of his 10 labors to make, one of his 12 labors to make up for murdering his wife and kids and abolishing all his sins and allowing him to become a god. Yay.
No.
Yep.
That's fun, not normal people stuff.
Yep. Well, that's standard Hercules.
Yeah.
Well, or as he's called right now at the moment, Heracles, which does not stop Hera from making his life utterly terrible.
That's so sad.
Yep.
I mean, like, I feel for her, you know what I mean? Like, I really do. She's been through a lot. Like, Zeus put her through some hell. But, what a bitch.
I know, right?
Yes.
So, anyways, as he's hauling the cattle through basically into near the Black Sea, what is modern Ukraine, he feels a little cold. And he's thinking, you know what, it's getting late. I might as well just stop for the night, and we'll continue on back to my master in the morning. And he goes to sleep with his big famous lion skin over him, without thinking anything else. And then the next day, he wakes up and he's like, "Where are my horses?" Because he rides a chariot. He has a bunch of horses, and he's like, "Where are my horses?" He starts looking around, and he enters into some woods, and, well, there are the horses. Wait, they weren't there last night? I know I let them off to graze, but, like, dude, this is a bit much. So, needless to say, he starts trying to figure out what the heck is going on. And basically, and about 5 seconds into his look, he sees a snake lady. Like, she's, basically, a woman half snake bottom. You've probably seen this in some Indian mythology thing. And basically, she's like, I kinda stole them, and, my deal is, I'll give them back to you, but only if we, do the wild things.
Whoa.
And Heracles is like, this is a strange deal, but I guess okay. So, some months later, after a lot of, you-know-whatsies, the snake lady's pregnant with 3 kids.
Oh.
As quick, and she really does not want Heracles to leave. Guess she really likes that. I guess she really likes that. I guess she really likes that demigod on her all night. But Heracles is like, I really gotta get back to my master to deliver the cattle and complete my quest. And she's like, all right, fine, you can take your horses and go. But what am I going to do with these 3 kids? Should I send them over to you to be a father, or should I be doing all the motherly raising? And Heracles makes a decision, and he grabs his second bow, because he apparently always had a second bow. I haven't heard this anywhere else. And he actually unstrings it. And he also takes off his girdle, which is his belt.
Yeah.
And he says, "Okay, whoever can wear both, wear the girdle and string my bow, is going to be in charge between the 3 kids." So, So the three kids come out, Agathrisis, Gelinus, and Scythes. And they eventually grow up, and the mother is like, okay, so now you're all of age, and this is what your father Heracles told me to do when you guys became old enough to do all the things.
Okay.
So obviously throw on this belt and string this bow. And the first two brothers fail epically. And then Scythes comes around, and he manages to put on the belt, and he grabs the bow. He has a little bit of trouble, but then he just manages to string it.
Ooh.
So, needless to say, everybody's like, okay, we're bowing down to you. Next question. And so after that, basically all the Scythians are basically related to him, and they're all named after him and all that jazz. And
Wow.
there is a bit more credence given to the story by historians, because there's actually a lot of Scythian art showing their warriors actually stringing their bows, because their bows are the best in the world at that time, and they're notoriously hard to string because that's how you propel the arrow. And so they had a lot of art showing that the Scythians were strong, manly Scythians, able to string their bows. And so they would have these on, like, gold stuff all over their tombs. They had these, like, basically from the Black Sea all the way to Hungary. Okay, so in some ways, Scythes is king of the Scythians, and there's a lot of art showing the Scythians being big, manly Scythians able to string their bow in one pull or whatever. And apparently, the women were. Wait, what?
It's like a cultural thing, you know. You were cutting out like around the part where you were discussing like.
Oh, the big manly Scythians?
Have historically been known.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
really strong, good bows, you know, and have been, like, so there's a lot of credence to that story. I think that's pretty cool.
Yep. And the women were also pretty good at stringing the bows and shooting the bows. So, needless to say, they were also accepted as warriors, although not as readily as the Scythians' next major successors in the Carpathian Basin, being the Sarmatians. But that'll be obviously another episode of the podcast later. But anyways, so they have all this art, but they also, surprisingly for a steppe tribe, have a lot of heavy armor, especially amongst the ruling class. Like, they have a lot of scale armor and a lot of, and a couple breastplates and a bunch of breastplates and helmets and metal shields. And apparently, most of this came out because of all the fighting that they were doing over in the Middle East. Because they wanted to be able to, like, take more damage from all the Middle Eastern bows, arrows, swords, and maces, and so on. And they also, thanks to their time there, they also developed their own helmet, the Kuben Helmet. It has a little bit of a cone at the top. I think that's basically mainly for helping to, like, deflect the energy of a blow straight to the head. So it's pretty good.
Okay.
And they also adopted, and they also had Shin Guards during this time. Originally, they all had basically like the metal plates over leather approach, like they would just sew it on there and then wear the Shin Guard. But then they decided to go for solid bronze ones because they saw the Greeks had such a wonderful time with those, and so they wore those. And they also adopted some Greek helmets. And I found it impressive that they were still able to fight on horseback, especially with the Greek helmets. Because, like, the Greek helmet, the usual one is, like, the Corinthian helmet, and basically, like, the amount of space that you can see is like you only have two eye holes enough to like just fit your eyes. It's like that's impressive for you to fight with a helmet like that.
Yeah, that's like really cutting off your peripheries and like a lot of like essential vision. Like that'd be scary. I could never.
Yeah, and they're also partly agricultural. Like sometimes they do some farming, but mostly they do we're raising cattle and occasionally pillaging.
Wow, it's an interesting lifestyle.
And they have a lot of tombs, especially all the way into Hungary, especially as they're being pushed out of their homelands over in modern-day Ukraine. And a lot of these and a lot of these tombs, they're very lavish. They have gold. They have dead horses in there. It's all sorts of stuff to basically say, we're going to be in the actual life across an eternal plane, hunting and doing what we used to do.
Yeah, all right.
That's pretty common for Sepno-Man mythology, as far as I know. And apparently there are some trenches, I think they found along some of the rivers over in Hungary. And these are basically, as far as I know, most historians believe to be border fortifications. So basically the Scythians, they didn't always spend all their time on horseback and fighting horseback. Sometimes they built a wall every once in a blue moon.
All right.
Probably a good call, considering that they had some very rowdy neighbors.
Yeah, like, you don't want to, like, exhaust your forces by constantly keeping them out. Have a wall do the majority of the legwork, And if people are feeling extra angry and decide to smash your wall down, then, like, you're ready, Yeah.
Yep. That's the idea. And
way to go.
And on another note, with all their military stuff and weapons, their bow design is very famous, obviously. Basically, everybody took one look at that and it's like, we're going to rip off of it. And basically every bow after that on the Scythian bow design. And, well, it's kind of shaped like the Greek letter sigma, and it's a recurve bow. Composite takes about a year to make. Wow. But needless to say, the work pays off when you're a horse archer. There were the sources I was reading, I think it was like this one book from Osprey Publishing on the Scythians, and apparently the legend has it that these bows could do like a range of 500 meters. Of course, although you probably weren't shooting 500 meters at all during a battle, like ever, because you're lucky if you can aim 500 meters, aim up to 200 meters, and most arrows are like shot off basically at like almost point blank range. Like you're just close, you're just far enough from the enemy's spearhead.
Right. So the distance is like nice, but that's also just the byproduct of the sheer strength, which is important in close range. So, like, I get it, Yep. And they also had... More people,
And they also had some very fancy golden scabbards for their swords, and they would often have this one extra loop to make it a little easier for them to... one extra loop on their scabbard to basically make it easier for them to draw it on horseback. Which I guess makes some sense because it's probably your backup weapon. I mean, like, can you really do spear, bow, and sword all at the same time? Not easily.
Yes.
And so...
Yeah, that's some hard stuff. Who could?
Yeah, and also on another note, Herodotus also rattled off a bunch of their customs, like how they bury their dead, how they get married, or in this instance, how they actually make promises. And basically, their way of making promises is, so they have the two parties who want to make their promises or arrange their treaties, and they bring, and the guy, and this one guy, he's the mediator, he brings in a pot full of a little bit of wine, and the two parties start gathering in a line, and they basically grab a knife, and they just drag a little bit on their arm. The blood drips into the pot, and it mixes in with the wine, and they all start drinking from that pot, and that's how they seal the pact. And if anybody finds this a little bit familiar, this is actually, especially if you're Hungarian, this is actually basically the famous Vérszerződés that everybody amongst the Magyars agrees upon before they head into Hungary. Basically, we salute whoever's the best chieftain among us, and we'll promise to serve you until our deaths because we drank the blood. And apparently this shows up throughout like various nomadic cultures, especially if you're anything Turkish.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's pretty neat, actually.
Yep. And so, and on another note, one they're also famous, rather famous unique traits is that unlike most nomadic tribes, the Scythians actually have one container for both their arrows and their bow. This is apparently known, I think, in the ancient Greek as a goritos, and these are often very richly decorated, sometimes made out of gold and silver and all that jazz. And they've shown up in a lot of places. One most famously in the tomb of King Philip II of Macedonia, also known as Alexander the Great's dad.
Oh, that's right.
That's
lineages, man, I swear.
I know, they get complicated.
Yeah.
Especially considering that Philip II didn't always spend his time as king married to one person and often had dalliances all over the place. But anyways, the story goes, so while the Scythians are in the Black Sea trying to basically living their life, doing the occasional pillaging and mostly grazing and some trading, mostly of slaves.
Oh my god, that's great. It's like we're mostly peaceful except for like we pillage sometimes, you know, and like we're but humble traders, but like, you know, they're slaves, but like it's fine because like people need them.
Yep.
Okay, guys. Okay, you all.
But anyways, their pillage runs have started to come back to haunt them, and what I mean by come back to haunt them, the Persians want a little bit of payback. So the Persians have basically conquered the Medes, they've conquered the Babylonians, they've conquered basically most of the Middle East.
Oh, so they're back.
So the Persians, this is around the year 513 BC, and the Persians are in this big empire, and they want to not just pay back the Scythians for all their pillaging, they also want to get rid of the Scythians as a general problem. So, needless to say, they march up a big army there to basically say, hey, we're conquering you, just bow down to us, get used to it. And the Scythians are led by King Idanthrisis and a bunch of others, and they're like, how about we don't? And King Darius, the first of Persia, is like, look, I have a big army, you probably don't want to fight it. And the Scythians are like, try me, basically. And they're like, and the Persians are trying to find the Scythian army, and they keep on looking like, so this is where the Scythians last camped, and they took a bunch of our stuff, and they've left no they've left no food for us. They've basically burned all the grass. And they're moving everything. They're not leaving anything behind for us. And so, needless to say, they try this again and again for months on end, and they never really find the Scythians. And the Scythians keep on finding them, taking away their supply lines, and just being an absolute nuisance. And the Persians are like, you know, the Scythians keep on outrunning us, and we're not getting anywhere. So, like most invasions of this region, because this is part of Russia, hello, we're just going to realize, well, we're out of supplies, we might as well just quit while we're ahead.
Alright.
So So the Persians pack up camp. They go. They cross the rivers all the way back home. They didn't conquer anything, but hey, at least they didn't all die. And this is
That's not actually a typical move. Normally, the conquerors and commanders be like, give it your all. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care about my troops. I don't care about my life. I don't care about anybody's life. We're going to get this at all costs. Or not, or die trying. Like, that's good. Talk about self-preservation. I wasn't totally expecting a different outcome, too, since they came in with the big armies. Scythians are some sneaky, sneaky people.
Yep.
All right, they're sneaky farmers. I'm going to call them sneaky farmers.
And horse archers.
Horse archers, right, with their epic bows.
Yep.
Sneaky, strong horse archer farmers.
Yep.
All right.
So and after that, they continue serving all over the place. Sometimes they work with the Persians. Sometimes they work the Greeks. Obviously for huge sums of money.
Yeah.
And they do this for a good few decades. But
Like, what are they, hitmen for hire or something?
Oh, yeah. Well, they're mercenaries, technically speaking.
Mercenaries, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and they eventually, they get into a little bit of trouble trying to conquer Thrace. And what I mean by trying to get into some trouble, they actually run into our old buddy Philip II. So Philip II, he is the king of Macedonia, and he's like, I'm going to grab my army, and we're going to fight the Scythians. You would expect this to go wrong. But the thing is, Philip's picked up a few tricks from basically everybody else who's tried and failed. And he uses his army, which is highly professionalized, which is going to be greatly used by Alexander to basically conquer the Persians. He confronts the Scythians, and he manages to actually defeat them.
Wow.
And the Scythians, and this is right around 339 BC, and this defeat kind of goes a little wrong for them, because they've had this one king. He's been around for a good long while. His name is Aetius. He's done most of the mercenary work. He's done a lot of negotiating and conquering, and, well, he finally gets defeated in battle in 339 BC at the age of 90, and is killed. And, well, it's...
Sorry, I can just picture that in my head. That's so epic.
Well, I guess somebody knew how to age like fine wine.
Defeated at 90. Plus the rest of that man's soul. Oh my god.
So anyways, he's dead, and the Scythians are like, okay, so no to Thrace, and we also got our butts kicked. Like, in an actual fair fight. People are going to start being extra pesky neighbors on us right now, right? Yup. So, needless to say, other people start going into Scythians' land, and they often prove to be better than the Scythians at fighting. And this most famously includes the Sarmatians, but the Scythians still have a little bit of strength left, because, which is probably a good thing, because one of their buddies, Olbia, has a problem. And what I mean by problem, I mean by Alexander the Great just sent an army to conquer them. And Alexander's and Alexander's like, we're taking Olbia. Olbia surrender. And Olbia's like, Scythia, are you going to help us or not? And Scythia's like, no fear, we're here, and the Macedonians are full of arrows, and they're running back home. So, needless to say, Olbia stays independent, and Alexander's reach never goes that far. And they've also been still interfering in the politics of this one kingdom, the kingdom of the Bosporus, which is basically right next door to modern day Armenia. And so like the king of that kingdom, he was around there for a good long while. He died, and then he left his empire to his two kids, and it took all about 5 seconds for them to be at each other's throats. And the two kids, they take to battle, and I believe one of the guys paid out a whole bunch load of gold to the Scythians, and he's like, "Hey, be in my army," and they're like, "Sure, of course," and they show up on his side of the battlefield, and at first the battle over at their Thetis is a bit of a tough going for this kid, for the oldest kid's army. He has all the Scythians. His right flank is pushed back by some fairly strong cavalry and infantry, and the left wings and the left wing is fighting pretty evenly with the enemy as well, and so he decides to basically grab his lance, and he's like, "Okay, we're aiming at the center and we're smashing everything. Your guys are supposed to be the best fighters. Get on, so charge." And they basically charge straight into the enemy center, and it's an absolute slaughterhouse for the younger kid. So he's basically forced to run. His entire center gets slaughtered, and it's forced to retreat, whatever's left of it, and then they swing around to help out the right flank, and to help out his right flank. The right flank is relieved. The younger kid's left is slaughtered, and I think the younger kid's right manages to retreat. But either way, the kingdom of the Bosphorus is going to be reigned over by the older kid right now at the moment, and that's basically the Battle of Thetis. So Scythians still have some strength left, but clearly the neighbors are a problem. The Sarmatians are next door, their raids are working, they're beating the Scythians in battle sometimes. They definitely got some problems. And basically unfortunately the Bosporus king, maybe he did want to help out his allies, I don't know. The kid's name is Satyrus, by the way. But either way, he stays out. And the Scythians, they finally take a look at what's happening, and they're like, "Okay, we're losing. We might as well just disappear." So we don't know exactly what happened to the Scythians right around 300 BC, but basically they're done. There's not much people speaking Scythian. The Scythian bow's still around, obviously. That's not going anywhere. But the Sarmatians are like, "We're basically going to own all this land now, so we're in charge." And yeah, that's basically the end of the wonderful, unique Scythians as they fought in all sorts of places: Mesopotamia, Syria, lots of Hungary. They had a lot of fort building, farming, and pillaging. Some friendships, lots of mercenary fighting too. But anyways, that's the Scythians. And I believe next time we're talking, basically we're going to be discussing the Sarmatians and how they have their own neighbor problems. Namely Rome and the Celts.
I like these neighbor problems.
Don't worry, we're going to be seeing a lot more. This is Eastern Europe. Get on board. Poland!
I'm hopping on the train.
Indeed. So anyways, love you all, guys. It's been a wonderful time recording Radio Pannonia, and bye. If you like this section of Radio Pannonia, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Also, be sure to follow me on whatever podcasting platform you are listening on. You can find this podcast on various platforms in the description, including Spreaker, Spotify, Anchor, etc. Follow me on Twitter at Janos for more Hungarian-related news, or YoungBards101 for my usual Twitter. Also follow me on Facebook and Tumblr, and donate to my Patreon or Anchor. Békét mindenkinek, és jó étterák a kis hadnagyjaim!